Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.
Welcome everybody in Dubai, welcome to the COP28 and welcome also ladies and gentlemen in our live stream. Thank you so much for joining us, of course also virtually here in our program here, live streaming from the German Climate Pavilion. Thank you everybody. It's a full house, a full pavilion today. Thank you for making the time in your busy calendars, I know it. There are so many busy days ahead and behind of us, so thank you very much for making the time and for also engaging with that topic now that we are focusing now on in the next hour. When we look into the latest IPCC report, the image is very clear when we talk about nature-based solutions for climate and biodiversity. It does play an important role for staying below the 1.5 degree global target. And now here in Dubai, of course, at the COP28, there is this momentum, there is this growing momentum for nature-based solutions, but also, of course, this attention increased already last year at the COP27, as well as in many, many initiatives last year. And at the same time, when we talk about the implementation of nature-based solution, which is also influenced by the way we use, of course, our landscapes and our natural resources, we have to talk about a specific keyword among many other keywords, but this keyword is biomass. And that's also something that we're going to debate today. If the use of biomass is designed in a sustainable way, it does contribute to the achievement of climate and biodiversity goals, as well as the further sustainable development goals. And that's the hot topic, of course, in the next hour. We'd like to shed light on the interface between nature-based solutions for climate and biodiversity and circular economy and the central role of how biomass is used. Before we start, also, of course, with you, ladies and gentlemen, in the audience, also with your questions, as it's not a one-way conversation, it's a two-way conversation. So please be engaged and give me a hand sign when you have later on a question. We do have time and microphones for that. Before we start into the big panel round, I'd like to start here with a high-level dialogue with two German ministers. Next to me already is sitting Steffi Lemke. She is the Federal Minister for the Environment, Nature, Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection from Germany. So thank you for making the time, of course, for elaborating our topic today. And joining us also virtually today, I welcome Minister Cem Özdemir, joining us from Berlin, Federal Minister of Food and Agriculture. Please give them a round of applause. I hope you can hear us well and you can see us, right, dear Minister?
Absolutely perfect.
Great. So that's the topic and that's the sign we can start now. Minister Steffi Lemke, I'd like to start with you. When we talk about our topic, I just mentioned a few keywords, nature-based solution. It is and has a key focus of your ministry's work. You drawn up a national action plan addressing nature-based climate action with different links and interlinkages. And today we also want to have a look closer into that when it comes to recycling biomass. So maybe you can share with us your motivation why you put that as a priority into the commitment to nature-based climate action. What drives you?
Yes, thank you for the question and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for being here because it's a really important and possible a critical or dangerous issue, what we discuss today in the afternoon. The biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis are increasingly pronounced, and they are reflected in the state of our forests and soils. They can be seen in the storms and severe floods. And in Germany, we had extreme flooding in the summer of 2021. And more than 100 people died as a result. We are experiencing droughts and crop failures. We have a really problematic summer. We have floods all over the world, and we have wildfires all over the world. And we know that we must do something to protect us, to protect the humans. There are a lot of these events around the world, and we can do this with a nature-based solution to protect us and to have a part of the solution for the climate crisis, because we can store carbon in nature areas, so we have a natural sink for carbon. And the nature-based solutions provide answers to the climate crisis and biodiversity loss, both of them in this way. And in addition to this, these measures also have important co-benefits, including climate change adaptation, which we also urgently need. This is why we in Germany have drafted the Federal Action Plan on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate and Biodiversity. This includes measures for all ecosystems, including peatlands, forests, seas, oceans, floodplains, and urban nature too. The aim is to strengthen nature and restore it where necessary. And it also includes measures for monitoring, research, and capacity building. Many of the measures in the action plan are for funding. The aim is to implement nature conservation on a large scale. This means, for example, restoring and re-wetting drained peatlands, converting forests to semi-natural mixed forests, and restoring rivers and streams and reconnecting them with their floodplains. Advisory services support implementation of the plan. And however, the challenges are already clear. It is not always easy to overcome the silo mentality. Nature-based climate action is only effective if many stakeholders from nature conservation, agriculture and forestry, spatial planning and local communities work together. There are many external factors that are important for the success of the action plan, and we have to keep these in mind. For example, the situation of land users. They must be able to continue to make a living. And because of that, we offer them opportunities to do so. And we are very interested in sharing experiences with nature-based climate action internationally. And we also have strong national networks in the moment. We are implementing the action plan in close cooperation with many stakeholders. Of course, this also includes the other ministries, and this is why I'm very pleased that my colleague Cem Özdemir has joined us today. Hi, Cem.
Thank you, Minister Lemke. Coming back to you, Minister Özdemir, of course, Minister Lemke just mentioned this close collaboration and the need for cooperation when it comes to nature-based solutions and when it comes to nature-based climate action. So coming and zooming into your ministry, you are responsible for agriculture and forestry. And maybe you can elaborate to us, how do you explain it to farmers and to forest managers, this urgent need when it comes to an ambitious solution for ambitious nature-based climate actions? What do you do and what do you like to foster on?
Well, thank you for the question, dear Kathy, and let me send warm greetings to my dear colleague, Steffi Lemke, and also use the opportunity to send my greetings here from the Ministry for Food and Agriculture in Berlin to all of you in Dubai. And if you allow me in particular to Claudia Müller, who is my deputy minister, who is present there as well. I've seen her on the screen just briefly. Well, Steffi has already greatly pointed out that the Federal Action Plan on Nature-Based Solutions for Climate and Biodiversity contains measures for the protection and restoration of forests, soil protection, wetland protection, and other carbon farming measures in agriculture, such as the increased planting of hedges and field copses. Our ministries, and this is really something unique, have been working closely together on implementing the program in all these areas. And you're absolutely right, as you said, in this context, it is particularly important that we can win over the land users to our cause, because if this is opposed by them, nothing will work ahead. We therefore want to set financial incentives and not leave the users alone with these immense challenges. We would like to make an offer to the agriculture and forestry sectors and value their climate mitigation performance, but it is equally important that we explain the significance of these measures very well. Many measures also have positive side effects for farmers and foresters themselves. Allow me to illustrate this through the example of humus formation in soils. Healthy soils are obviously, and we all know that, the basis for resilient agriculture, especially in times of the climate crisis.
So it really comes down to collaboration, cooperation, working together. Again, Minister Lemke, you are not only responsible for nature-based climate action, of course, but also for the topic of circular economy. And I think we need to talk about that as well. Why do you highlight also the cooperation, but also this link within that connection when it comes to circular economy in our topic of today, nature-based solution?
This is what I mentioned as nature-based solutions can be also be a critical or dangerous issue if we do not in the right way. Nature-based climate action aims to create healthy and resilient ecosystems, and they also have many positive functions for people, for food, water supply, and recreation. At the same time, the pressure on these ecosystems is growing. And this is caused by increasing use and often overuse. One important factor is raw material extraction. It leads to the destruction of nature, high emissions, and high water consumption. This is why it is so important to recycle every type of raw material and use less new raw materials. The demand for biomass, for example wood, is increasing drastically. The removal of carbon from the atmosphere is a subject of intense debate. And we continue to see unrealistic scenarios for biomass use. And we have some developments in the last decades in Germany for overusing biomass for a crop. And biomass is only available in limited quantities. This makes it all the more important that we use it sustainably and effectively. During biomass combustion, the carbon stored in the biomass is released again. And this means that combustion should only ever be the last in the chain of cascading uses. Instead, we need to make the use of biomass resource efficient and truly sustainable. This means durable products that can be used again and again. We can then achieve climate benefits in several ways at once. There is a pressing need to improve the reuse and recycling of biomass-based products. This will ensure that carbon is stored for as long as possible and that the demand for primary biomass does not exceed the supply available in the long term.
Thank you, Minister Lemke. Well, when it comes, Minister Özdemir, I'd like to come back to you, because one thing is to talk, of course, here on stage about biomass-based products and the cascade of natural-based solutions. But when it comes to biomass-based products that can be recycled, maybe you can share with us a concrete project that also, of course, is based within your ministry, so that we come into practice a bit here.
Sure. Well, as already before, Steffi has greatly and already mentioned the great benefits of cascades used for climate change mitigation. And having said that, it's clear that we're facing a challenge there, because we still have a way to go there. The longer we are able to keep biomass-based products within the material cycle, the longer the carbon contained therein will remain stored. The aim must therefore be to enhance carbon sinks and to consistently apply cascade use concepts. This can, for instance, be done through the strengthening and the development of reusable and recyclable wood products, especially in the construction sector. Against this background, we have launched the Timber Construction Initiative together with the Federal Ministry for Housing, Urban Development and Building. Again, this is an area where we work very close together in our government. One of its 8 lines of action explicitly addresses the promotion of recycling-oriented and resource-conserving construction. Beyond this, our initiatives under the National Dialogue Process on the Charter for Wood 2.0 are also focused on the topic of so-called circular economy. Here, experts from the federal government, the federal states, the industry, and the scientific community are working together to identify and, of course, communicate solution concepts. Beyond that, my ministry, via the Agency for Renewable Resources, supports a large number of forestry and wood research projects with funds from the Renewable Resources Funding Program. This also includes projects aiming at establishing a circular economy in the timber sector. Against this background, Germany is also supporting the Global Coalition on Green Construction with Sustainable Wood, which has just launched at COP28 on December 6th. And we stand ready to share our national experiences, obviously, with other partners on the planet. Thanks.
Thank you for that insight. Coming back for our last question to you, Minister Lemke. So we are here. Of course, the negotiations are still ongoing. Everybody is debating how successful the COP28 will be. So what are your wishes as a result when you're going to leave the COP28? What is needed to happen?
If I speak only for my ministry, there are very important that for me that we take a much broader view of climate action than in the last years. Because without nature protection, without nature-based solutions, we can't solve the climate crisis. Protecting our ecosystems is closely linked to climate action, and we need to integrate our activities under the various Rio Conventions, UNFCCC, CBD, and also UNCCD, much more closely. I see positive developments here, and all 3 conventions have succeeded in mainstreaming nature-based climate action in the cover decisions of the last few COPs, and we must build on this success. Today, a wide range of initiatives have been launched to address nature and land use. This is an important message, and on the German side, we are particularly committed to the INACT partnership for nature-based solutions. 14 countries have already joined, and through this partnership, we aim to promote nature-based climate action globally, together with our many like-minded partners. The guiding principle is that we can only succeed in protecting our ecosystems if we also consider how they are used. And this includes the many incentives that affect their use. We need to recognize the links between these issues. Whether we are talking about carbon credits or decarbonizing our economy, we need solutions that have the most positive overall impact. But the most important message is this: nature conservation and climate action go hand in hand. We can and we must address both at the same time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you both, to you both. This is your round of applause to Minister Steffi Lemke and Minister Cem Özdemir. Greetings from Dubai to Berlin.
Thank you, and greetings back, and let me say good luck, and fingers are crossed for good decisions there, and many greetings to you guys, in particular to Steffi and her team, and Claudia, and of course my team from the Ministry for Food and Agriculture. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you, also Minister Lemke. We see you later. I'd like to come now to my expert panel, ladies and gentlemen, and you get ready with your pens and your questions, right? So there will be the possibility to ask your questions. Please join me on stage, and then we start the introduction here in a second. Lovely to have you. You're going to sit over there, and may I ask you to be here on the right-hand side? Thank you. And also, we do have a virtual guest that I'd like to introduce also, of course, in a second. So, ladies and gentlemen, the big question now for the next hour is how to make use of nature-based solutions and biomass in a way to maximize, of course, climate mitigation results. And I welcome now, joining us virtually, Janusz Potocznik. I hope you can hear us well. You're the co-chair of the International Resource Panel, IRP. Among other roles, he's a partner at System IQ and advisor to a lot of thought-leading institutions such as the European Forest Institute. And before that, I know your CV is very long, but just to name a few, you were also the European Commissioner for the Environment. Great to have you, and thank you for joining us. With us is also Eliane Ubaljoro. Thank you also for joining us. You're the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry, and you're the Director General of ICRAF. You're an experienced leader with a background in agriculture and molecular genetics. You're a member of several committees, so your CV is also very long, just to name a few, but you're also recognized for your outstanding contribution to innovation and gender equality. That stands out. And you're also a fellow of the International Science Council. Thank you for making the time in your busy calendar to join us here today at the German Climate Pavilion. We have Dr. Giacomo Grassi with us here in the center. You're the Senior Scientist Officer at the Joint Research Center, JRC, of the European Commission. You're working on CO2 fluxes from land use at EU and on global levels. You're contributing to the design and implementation of EU legislation related to forests, to climate, and you're conducting scientific analysis to assess the collective climate progress under the Paris Agreement. And of course, not to forget, you're also an expert reviewer of greenhouse gas inventories for the UNFCCC. Thank you for being here today. It's great to have you. Next to me, to the left, Professor Philipp Misselwitz, Executive Director Bauhaus Earth, which develops new systemic approaches for climate positive and circular building. You are an architect and an urban planner. I read you're based in Berlin, and your research focuses on the impact of planetary, social, and ecological crises on architecture, urban development, and urban-rural relations. So you do have also a lot of nexus in your portfolio. Thank you also for joining us, Philipp. Last but absolutely not least, also with us, is Franziska Tanneberger. You are the head of Greifswald Meyer Center. You're teaching at the University of Greifswald. You're the head of, as I mentioned, the Greifswald Meyer Center, and you're advising the German government on climate and on sustainability issues. You've also been taking part in numerous COPs as a scientist, and your research is linking Meyer biodiversity, peat formation, peatland restoration, and peatland carbon credits. So thanks also for being here and your busy time. We go on with the following. So we have prepared a round of inputs, and then we have a conversation with you, right? So still get your pens ready and your questions. It's a very kind and warm-hearted invitation. Giacomo Grassi is with us, as I mentioned, and you also prepared some slides for us, right? So we'd like to start with that. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Slides are here.
You can, yes. Here to the left or to the right.
Okay.
Yeah?
Good afternoon, and many thanks for the invitation. Well, according to the IPCC, stopping human-caused global warming at any level requires at least reaching net zero CO2 emission, along with strong reduction in other greenhouse gases. Net zero means that any residual gross CO2 emission has to be compensated by an equivalent amount of CO2 removal, as shown in this figure. In that context, nature-based solutions are extremely important. Nature-based solutions, including the protection of ecosystems, the improved management, and the restoration of degraded ecosystem. It is important because nature-based solution can help addressing both the problem through reducing emission from deforestation and help with the solution through the removal of CO2, which is also called sink. The importance of this CO2 sink will increase as we approach net zero. But be careful, sinks cannot be used to substitute deep emission reduction in other sectors. The IPCC, in various reports, have assessed the main nature-based solution options. And in addition to these options, sustainably sourced biomass can be used instead of greenhouse gas intensive material in products and other sectors. And this is the topic of this slide. This is also called the forest-based bioeconomy. And to assess the potential climate contribution of the forest-based economy, we need to look at the system perspective. We need to look at the various mitigation options that we can group into categories. One category is the increasing carbon stock, also called net sink, in forest and in the harvested wood products. Another category is the potential substitution effect of using wood for material use and wood residues for energy. And we should be aware that these options have trade-off and synergy, each with the temporal dynamics. And we have to think to the overall impact of these options, knowing that there is no one solution that fits all, and often the solutions are local. I will start from the most important, from a quantitative point of view, of this option, which is the sink in the forest. Here is the trend of the land use LULUCF sink in the European Union. And we have, you see the red line, which is the net LULUCF sink, including all the categories. The net LULUCF sink is dominated by the green line, which is the forest, while the agricultural CO2 from cropland and grassland are a source. As you know, in the EU, we recently agreed on a legislation that set an ambitious target for 2030. Unfortunately, as you can see from this graph, the net LULUCF sink is decreasing at the EU level. It's decreasing quite fast due to a decline of the forest sink, due to a number of factors, including increased harvest demand, increasing impact of natural disturbance, and you know in Germany have experienced a lot of that in the recent years, and a decrease in forest growth in some regions due to also climate change impact. We need to stop and reverse this trend if we want to reach this 2030 climate target. And among other things, we need better and more timely data. National Greenhouse Inventory often rely for the forest sector on national forest inventory, which are collect data periodically every 5 or 10 years. And in some countries, we are somehow in a situation of a driver that drive on unfamiliar road and has a navigation system that gives the position of few hours ago. Even if the position is accurate, if you are in a hurry and you are not in a familiar road, then this information may not be relevant for the policymaker. And secondly, we must achieve a more efficient use of biomass, which is the main topic of this side event. And this include, as a first step, assessing the current state of the biomass uses. These figures give a vague idea of the complexity of the biomass flows that include the primary and secondary wood that is used either for material or energy uses. If you're interested to know more, there are a couple of links to publication from the Joint Research Center, the institution I work at, which make this kind of analysis at the EU level and also for individual countries. Second step is, once you know the state of the current state of stocks and flows, explore scenarios. So playing with models to say, what happens if I harvest more, harvest less, and more importantly, what happens if I use wood in different ways? And this may help to identify win-win option, including, for example, also biodiversity. It is impossible right now to assess all the implication of this kind of analysis, but some key take-home message include that cascading use of wood is, of course, an important element and surely help achieving a positive climate impact. Equally important is shifting the use of wood toward products with longer service lives and substitution benefit. But even more important is to keep the system perspective. Don't look only on one aspect. Remember that an increasing harvest for greater use of wood in the construction per se is positive, but if comes at the expense of an increased wood demand, then has a short-term negative impact on the forest sector. And short-term in forestry means few decades. So if you decrease the sink in the forest, this may impact the chance to fulfill your climate target. In that context, the use of wood for bioenergy is not the most efficient use of wood, unless it comes from residues that do not have any better use and do not impact in a negative way biodiversity. Last, don't forget forest resilience. We have to manage our forest to cope with the changing climate. A forest that is not able to adapt to a changing climate will not be a forest capable of providing ecosystem service, including wood and other services. Thank you.
Thank you for your perspective on the role of nature and nature-based solutions now in climate change mitigation, as you just elaborated. Thank you for that first input. We're coming to our virtual guest, Janusz is with us, and I hope you're still with us. You will take us with you into the question why and how circularity can be a game changer for the use of and demand for biomass when we talk about circular economy and circularity. So the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Katie. Dear ministers, friends, regards from Brussels, and thank you for the invitation. It was, by the way, good to hear a former colleague from the JRC, since I was also proud to be responsible for it for 5 years. Circular bioeconomy is the oldest concept on the planet Earth. All nature is based on the principles of circular economy. Nothing is lost, and everything has its purpose. We humans, as part of nature, should actually abide by the same principles. Unfortunately, what seems logically in theory, it's not so clear in practice. According to UNEP's International Resource Panel, resource use, including biomass, is at the root of our triple planetary crisis, and the trends are alarming. Overall, material extraction and processing are responsible for over 90% of land-related biodiversity loss and water stress, 55% of climate impacts, and 40% of health-related pollution impacts, and it is predicted to continue to grow. Our consumption and production patterns designed by industrial world are wasteful and unjust. If we do not change them, we will face increasingly severe environmental impacts while not having even basic human needs met. Use of biomass alone drives 28% of climate impacts from material extraction and processing, and almost all biodiversity, land-related and water stress impacts from the biomass use. Meanwhile, biomass is of course the basis for our essential need of food, nutrition, energy, and it has also grown importance in providing our need for shelter. If we want to meet internationally agreed climate, biodiversity, pollution, land degradation goals, integrating systemic resource-based solutions into implementation plans, it's a must. Biomass is an integral part of sustainability solutions, but if we do not fundamentally change production and consumption patterns, wood and fiber biomass extractions could, according to our modeling, grow by 80% by 2060, and we are already surpassing what's sustainable. There is another way, targeting our use of biomass towards delivery of essential human needs. Policy recognition of the circular economy solutions, it's encouraging, and some circular bioeconomy actors are already delivering decoupling in practice. But if the famous Ellen MacArthur butterfly would fly, it would be flying in circles, as we have done more on the butterfly's technosphere wing than we have done on the biosphere wing of renewable materials. To exploit the full potential of biomass's offering, and since the environmental impacts of biomass use could be high, especially for biodiversity, some basic principles need to be followed. Cascading use approach should be the norm. We should prioritize uses of biomass which maximize well-being and minimize impact. Where possible, biomass sourcing should focus on biomass waste. where human needs can be delivered by using biomass instead of energy-intensive material, we can prioritize biomass. It can be an effective replacement, for example, for steel in buildings in the norm of cross-laminated timber. We must seek to avoid transforming the richest ecosystems, keep high-value biomass intact. Clear guidelines and agreed sustainability criteria are essential to establish the needed trust. The bioeconomy's potential to address climate change should not be at the price of biodiversity loss. Priority should be given to long-term uses, where carbon is stored, and in applications where alternative materials with very large impacts can be substituted. Most circular strategies still focus on cleaning supply chains and optimizing classical circular economy strategies like recycling. They are all needed, but missing major opportunities for improving resilience through reducing demand for energy and materials altogether. What we really need are systemic interventions, which would encourage and limit, as mentioned by Minister Lemke, the need for energy and resource use in the first place. Policy attention should be given to most energy and resource-intensive systems like mobility, housing, nutrition, daily functional needs, and of course energy production. We must reject the assumption that these systems need to be resource-intensive. To conclude, success is about speed and scale. Nature-based solutions are a must. Also, circular bioeconomy has a major potential to help providing answers to the challenges we are facing. It is an essential ingredient for living well and thriving within the planetary boundaries, but only if it will respect sustainability criteria and avoid the temptations of using shortcuts and prioritizing short-term economic gains. Greenwashing always risks backfiring, reducing the credibility and even the biomass use potential. Ultimately, changing our relationship as humans being part of nature is not only environmental, but also an economic, equity, and security imperative to strengthen collective resilience. This relationship is unfortunately not stable, nor balanced, and it will be resolved either with urgent collective wisdom and cooperation, or in a hard and painful way. There is no third choice. More than an economic or technological choice, this is actually a moral choice. The future will be green, or there will be no future. Thank you.
Thank you, Janusz, for bringing your perspective here on stage and for, again, joining us. Well, when we talk about the integration of land use and cascading biomass use, we also need to talk about how it benefits the people, the communities, the biodiversity, and therefore Eliane will share with us her thoughts on that question. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Minister Lemke and Özdemir for their leadership. It's a real pleasure to join all of you on stage, and I love the remarks of my previous panelists. And I thank you, Kathy, for this introduction and moderation of this session. So as the CEO of C4ICRAF, an international research and development organization on trees, forests, and agroforestry landscapes, our research is focused on climate change, biodiversity, and food. If we are to stabilize our climate, safeguard biodiversity, and ensure food security for everyone, it's clear we need a paradigm shift from an extractive and destructive economic model to a regenerative one. We need to work with nature and not against it, because nature is our best technology. We need to preserve it and use it wisely and sustainably. As you know, we've surpassed 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries. The effects of our production systems on biodiversity, water, land, and soil, and the release of CO2 in the atmosphere accompanying almost all human activities are an indication of extreme inefficiencies. But as Gonzalo Munoz, an entrepreneur and high-level champion of the Chile COP famously said, waste is a design problem. And in many indigenous languages, the word waste doesn't even exist. And fortunately, we have the research and the knowledge to design better economic activities. An example given by my friend Mark Palahi from the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance is this. The production of 1 kilogram of roasted coffee beans emits 22 kilograms of CO2. The same kilogram produced regeneratively will soak up carbon, generating a sink of minus 4.5 kilograms of CO2. That's a difference of 26.5 kilograms per kilo of coffee beans. Analysis shows that transforming the global economy according to bioeconomy principles, once completed, could save 10 billion metric tons of CO2 every year. That's a quarter of our current emissions. And what's critical there is, well, it's a shift to a forest-based bioeconomy. Every human on the planet uses on average 1/2 cubic meter of wood each year. This represents what the current forestry and agroforestry produce in terms of timber. Will we need more or less? Well, we may think more as we are shifting away from fossils, but future demands for wood uses will fall. Think of paper globally and wood fuel in Africa. This may balance out a global demand, according to a study we undertook with the European Forestry Institute in 2020. Wood is an incredible resource, and each day brings new technology advances. It can be hardened as steel for construction, it can be softened for fabric, it can be made transparent, it can be liquefied, and technologies are becoming available to replace the hydrocarbons from oil and gas for plastic, fertilizer, lubricants, nylon, and polyester with nature-based solutions. Wooden buildings of 10 stories and more are being erected in Oslo, Vancouver, and Japan. This has huge implications for reductions of cement use, another large source of emissions. Following circular bioeconomy principles, reduce, reuse, recycle, is important in this context. Intelligently designed cascading use may help keep harvested biomass in circulation for longer, and thus reduce the release of CO2 into the atmosphere. This temporary sink of CO2 could provide a much-needed relief. And starting these transformation now will set us up to the right path towards 2030. Wood use and its economic value are dramatically different in different parts of the world. For example, in Europe, 500 million cubic meters of wood produce $102 billion of value. In Africa, 800 million cubic meters of wood produce just 6 billion USD. In Africa, 90% of the harvested wood is used for energy. There is a real opportunity to produce more value from our wood and biomass in Africa, whether it's organic fertilizers on farms, new textiles in the sustainable fashion industry, or building materials for green cities that showcase the beauty of African architecture. At C4ICRAF, our research shows that if we cultivate these industries across Africa and utilize half of harvested wood towards new engineering, this could create 5 million housing units storing 100 million tons of CO2. It could create 8 million jobs and an injection of 200 billion USD to Africa's economy. Much more needs to be done and can be done to bring the world together on this subject. A forest-based bioeconomy can enrich the forest sector and contribute to poverty reduction and natural resource conservation in Africa. Strategies will require adopting a strong social sustainability approach. A bioeconomy transition must be for all. It must be transparent, just, and fair. Ushering in a cascading circular bioeconomy can achieve impact by 2030 in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It can increase biodiversity in productive landscape areas, increase the value of sustainably produced biomaterials for a global economy, and connect sustainably managed landscapes, the rural environment, enterprises, cities, and protected areas, and create millions of jobs, building wealth and improving livelihoods for women, men, and young farmers and small entrepreneurs. What's key is we need to break down the divide between countries in the global north and south, and share knowledge and expertise both ways. It's a matter of justice and equity. Every corner of our globe should have equal access to the scientific advancements that can improve lives and safeguard our planet. And it's an investment in the future of our planet. It's a commitment to addressing the pressing challenges of our time while partnering with brilliant minds from around the world to lead the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. for elaborating on the matter of justice. But also you mentioned, and of course wood is an incredible resource. That brings me to Philip, looking into the role of the building sector for the current use of biomass and of course the potentials for change. So which thoughts did you bring with you? And I think you also brought a presentation, right?
Yes, I did.
So
well, thank you to Jan for actually summarizing the argument I wanted to make here so eloquently. No, sincerely, and all that's left for me to do is maybe to substantiate a bit. So let me, while the challenges in the global forest carbon sink are probably well known to the audience here, and the reasons for the pressures and disturbances, let me focus just at the beginning of my presentation just a little bit on what's at stake in the building world. So you know that 42% of greenhouse gas emissions are caused in the building sector, and by 2050 we are assuming, if things go on as they do now, that half of those will be embodied emission. So we are focusing still in policy making on energy efficiency, which is important, valuable, but we have a major problem here in the brewing. On top of that, we are expecting that the number of buildings will estimate to double what we have now. So we are going to build exactly what we have out there again. And we know that business as usual practices could generate between 70 and 100 gigatons of CO2, depending on exactly what is getting built. But it's a major problem brewing in full swing, and we have to somehow face it. So how could nature-based solutions help here? First of all, I think, and I'm not going to focus on that, but I want to mention that avoidance efficiency is obviously, for me, the key to reduce this insane material consumption in construction, and to focus on urban densification, to focus on reuse of buildings as much as possible, and also to carefully control urban sprawl. I think we also need, and COP has focused on that a lot with the cement breakthrough, obviously on decarbonizing the main materials that we use at the moment, cement and steel. But what I want to focus on is the opportunities I see in shifting with a substantive amount of the material demand for retrofitting and for new construction to biomass. And I know that this is a difficult argument to make, but I think we have to go down this route, and we have to very carefully sort of assess the corridors within which this might be possible. On the right here, I'm showing a drawing from a new UNEP Global ABC report that was published and talked about recently, also at this COP, which shows that generally we do not assume that everything can be done from wood or a broader range of biomass, but we are talking probably about a substantive increase. Now, how could this work without actually putting further pressures on biomass that the minister has laid out before? How can this be done without actually having unrealistic expectations? First of all, I think, and this has been mentioned by previous speakers, we have to redirect wood to the most climate positive applications, which is not fuel or not cooking, but it is, I think, bio-based, durable, reusable products for construction, which offers, I think, as it's unique in this sector, that it offers longevity over 50, 100, 150 years. I would also say that we need to promote landscape approaches to take pressure off forests and actually explore a broad range of biomass resources, including agricultural waste. And we need to, of course, really strengthen and rigorously enforce forest safeguards and incentivize the application of good practices and independent certification programs whose standards should be regularly reviewed to ensure management effectiveness, to promote ecologically sustainable harvests, enhance biodiversity, observe chain of custody requirements, limit forest land conversion, and support local communities. And this is what I mean when I talk about sort of locally available or regionally available bio and geo-based building products, not just timber-based products, but including, of course, bamboo, but also earth, mud, sand, sawdust, rice husk, hemp, and many, many other materials that can be made into durable building products. And I would also agree with previous speakers by emphasizing that we need to take a systemic view to think forests and cities together in order to really harvest the opportunity here with what we sometimes at Bauhaus Earth call a building forestry pump, to carefully source materials such as timber and many other agricultural products, bring it into the building cycle, keep it there as long as possible. And I'm not talking about, I actually don't like talking about cascading, because it has this sort of, for me, as a visual thinking person, it has this sort of image of actually downcycling rather than keeping material at value in use as long as possible. And in the building sector, you can actually do that. You can design for disassembly, for reuse, and in many contexts, this is already happening. And this reappreciation, in a sense, of a higher value use of biomass, we would assume would also create value upstream and reinvestment and replenishing of forests. And this is really the challenge. I mean, there is a major construction project going on out there, and it will not stop regardless of how much we are talking here about biomass protection. We are expecting up to 2.5, 3 billion people moving into cities, and they want to build, and they have the right to build. They have the right to be housed in dignity. So the challenge here for me is actually system collapse or turning the construction activity into a process of healing. And hope gives me, for instance, traveling through countries like Bhutan, where we are doing research thanks to funding from this ministry, the Ministry of Environment in Germany, where we see actually these material practices still at work, for instance, in rural contexts. You see here a house in Bhutan being made with rammed earth construction techniques, neighbors coming together to set up a temporary workshop, to use some trees from nearby forests as much as it's needed, and many other materials. It's the ultimate regenerative practice, and the question is how we can prevent this disconnect with all this knowledge, all these kind of materials when it comes to cities where the majority of material demand is happening. So we are really calling for place-based, nature, people, positive construction value chains as something which could harness these win-win situations that we are talking about to really allow a synergetic co-repair between landscapes and cities, climate, nature, people, positive construction value chains, which bring value upstream for investment and restoration of ecosystem services, and downstream to contribute to healthy carbon storing cities and buildings. And we also think that this allows actually a just transition by redistributing the opportunities. Cement and steel are centralized global production machines, and by switching to regionally available bio-based materials, I think we have the potential for much more equitable business models to evolve. There are many other actions which are partly mentioned, and I'm happy to bring it into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Because I love language, so I just wanted to dive into that one question again. If you don't like the word cascading, how else should we phrase it? Because I think language has a lot to do with how we work and what we bring on the table, and everybody has different definitions. So again, just to put it down, how would you call it, or what other word would you like to use?
Well, within architecture and the building world, we're talking really about the need to design without waste at all, without actually downcycling the materials that we use, and keep it really at value without downgrading the kind of value as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And I know that the current standards assume that wood used in construction will be burnt after 20 years. I think this makes timber construction not have a level playing field. It's the wrong basis for calculation. So we really have to keep sort of the product value as high as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much also for your questions online, ladies and gentlemen. I know that you're very busy with Slido, so thanks again. We're coming back to your questions in a second. But of course, Franziska is still here on our stage. We talk about value chain, and maybe you can bring us your perspective into that topic as well.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And maybe I would like to start with a reconnection to Giacomo's talk, actually. Maybe you recall there was a figure on the LULUCF sector, the forest line, and then the total line, and there was a blue line with emissions. I mean, why the hell do we have emissions in the LULUCF sector? Do you have an idea what it is? And I think we should give it a name. It's a peatlands. It's drained peatlands, drained organic soils. And I would like to speak a few words about peatlands and at the same time make the connection to Philip, actually, to building materials. And I'm very glad that we do cooperate already with Bauhaus Earth because they provide a lot of products that can also help us in this crisis. So paludiculture as an example for creating new products and value chains. And maybe we move on to the next slide.
Or you take the clicker here.
Yeah, I have to do it myself.
Yeah, perfect.
That's fine. A few words in general about peatlands. I mean, there's quite German-based audience here, but also an international one. A few figures in Germany, it's 5% of our soils, and it contributes about 7% of our greenhouse gas emissions, 53 megatons per year. Globally, we have 488 million hectares of these peatlands, so it is a global potential that we actually have. And 88% of these peatlands are not yet drained. They are in a natural state, and we should leave them in a natural state. Also, we can also look at the biomass and sustainable use from it. 12% are degraded and losing peat at the moment, so they are providing a large source of CO2 emissions. And we are also at the moment losing around 500,000 hectares of healthy peatlands that are still a carbon sink per year. So we discuss a lot of technical solutions at the moment, but at the same time we are losing the carbon sink, the natural carbon sink that we actually have in our soils. This makes up 2 billion tons of CO2 equivalents per year. And the biggest emitters are actually Indonesia. I'm just coming from a meeting with Indonesian colleagues. They're moving very fast forward with rewetting and restoring. Russia is a big emitter, and the European Union. So it is us, basically, with 12% of global emissions from peat soils. You also see it on the top, about 50% of our European peatlands are drained. And all these figures are from the Global Peatlands Assessment, which has been released last year here at COP27, and is also now in the discussion in many events here. So what is now the collection to products, to circular economy, to building maybe? Paludiculture is a way of using wet peatlands, either the wet ones that were never drained, but even better the re-wetted ones, because then we get a lot of climate benefits actually from re-wetting and from these products. So by re-wetting peatlands, we can address actually a lot of our sustainable development goals. So you can link many of them directly to this ecosystem, to this activity. And it is not about the climate only. So what we see in discussions with farmers very much at the moment, it's about water. So for them, the climate crisis is something very theoretical for many still, but water scarcity is very relevant, also in many parts of Germany right now already. So peatlands, wet peatlands, they can act like sponges. They can keep the water in the landscape and also keep a stable landscape water balance. It's about fighting eutrophication, also an issue in many countries. Think of the Netherlands, for example. Also a big political issue. So drained peatlands release a lot of nitrate. Wet peatlands keep it in the peat. And then biodiversity loss and climate change, of course, as well. So there are many reasons, actually, why to re-wet peatlands. In Germany, it's a very large area. It's more than 1.5 million hectares that have to be re-wetted to achieve these goals. And luckily, if you compare it to the fossil fuel exit, for example, I mean, then you really have to stop extracting coal. For the peatlands, you have options to use it in a wet way. And this is a very nice potential also for farmers. And some of these options and opportunities are listed below. You can use wet meadows, you can use reed canary grass, alder as a tree growing on wet peatlands, reed or cattail, for example, peat mosses, and you can also farm water buffaloes. In the temperate region, in the tropical region, it's of course very different species. And there's a threefold climate gain at least. You reduce soil-borne emissions by raising the water table again, and it immediately stops the emission. It does not immediately bring back a natural peatland, but it stops the emissions immediately, and it can be 30 tons per hectare and year. You can substitute fossil materials, and you can create a new product sink. So by, for example, using building materials. There's on the screen a tiny house that we actually built together with colleagues, made from paludiculture biomass. And just look around in this pavilion here. Much of the pavilion you can actually build with paludiculture plants. They are very robust, they are very good in insulation, but also as construction materials. Some of the examples, again, here there's a house where you can see different parts of a house that could be made from these materials. And on the big picture you see the largest cropping paludiculture site now for cattail, for taifa. And for example, this is also an interest of the industry producing clothes, because they can use it as a filling material for jackets. So there's a UK-based company, they actually came to us to pick up big bags with this material. It's only 10 hectares right now, but it's a very interesting pilot site. And here we also do study effects on biodiversity, and we can show that paludiculture does not harm biodiversity. In contrast, you actually gain a lot by revetting, because typical Maya-specific biodiversity comes back. And especially under low-intensity paludiculture, you have a lot of gain for different species groups. So we still do need to overcome one key problem when it comes to paludiculture, and this is illustrated with this nice hen and egg lock-in effect here. So many farmers are basically ready to do it, so they see the business case in it within growing extent, but they need to have people buying actually the biomass for making products out of it. And luckily now we have 9 large-scale funded projects in Germany really addressing this over 10 years. 4 of them are funded by the Ministry of Environment and 5 funded by the Ministry of Agriculture, so that's a very nice collaboration actually. There is a central scientific project accompanying all of this to gather a lot of scientific insights into it. And at the same time, there's now an alliance forming of German businesses. Actually, it's a mistake. It's starting next year officially, but it's growing already. There are more than 10 really large businesses joining. It's the Tomorrow Initiative, and they will try to pull the value chain from the other side, because simply only by pushing it from the peatlands, that will not be enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you were giving us a few keywords that we're going to dive into in a second. So thank you also, Franziska. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to combine now the online questions with some more questions, but also you can give me always a hand sign if you have some burning questions on your chest. So, Giacomo, coming back to the facts and figures that you've also mentioned, and when we talk about the examples of the trees again, and when we look into that, why are the emissions from bioenergy counted when the tree is harvested and not when it's burned? So maybe you can explain to us that contradiction, and then maybe combine it also with the question, how do we know how much biomass we can use from the forest so that it doesn't affect biodiversity or climate action?
Okay, thank you. Well, why the tree, when they are harvested, the carbon loss is counted in the land use sector instead of the energy sector, essentially. By the way, I'm also part of the PC task force on greenhouse gas inventory that coordinate the guidance that countries use for preparing their inventories. The reason are essentially practicability and avoidance of double counting. So it is not counted in the energy sector because it's counted in the LULUCF sector. One may say, why? Why don't count in the LULUCF sector and count in the energy sector instead? Well, it would be not practicable. The first reason is, okay, you should track the use of wood after it leaves the forest, which is doable in some country, but is challenging in some areas. But the main reason I would say is that when you burn a piece of wood, it can come from harvest, can be harvested few days ago, few weeks ago, few years ago, but in some cases decades ago. That is end-of-life wood. So it would require, to avoid double counting with the LULUCF sector, it would require a retrospective correction of your LULUCF sector, and it is almost impossible to be achieved, because one of the good practice guidance from MPC is that a country should report the annual greenhouse inventory with emission where and when they occur.
Mm-hmm. The other question went into the question how much biomass we can use from the forest so that it doesn't affect biodiversity or climate action.
Well, it's a difficult question. It's the only, I would
maybe
say,
the $1 billion question.
Yeah, well, yes. The only scientific and robust question is it depends. It depends on the local condition, and that's why we need scientists and data collected at a local level to try to identify win-win and lose-lose option. Even identify lose-lose option is a great value to say. I don't follow that path. But in general, we often heard that only residues can be used for bioenergy. This is a common rule, but also you have to assess when and where residues anyway may have a local value for biodiversity. So not necessarily burning residues is good for or at least maybe good for climate, but not necessarily for other, for example, for biodiversity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Janos, you mentioned, and I noted it down, that we need systemic interventions, of course, when it comes to circularity. And I'd like to come back to that because, of course, you're the expert on that, and I would love to hear more, and we would all love to hear more when it comes to the way out of a non-circular, mainly energetic use of biomass. So which levers do you see? And a little to-do list to really knock it down when we talk about the systemic interventions. What would be on your wish list for Christmas?
Yeah, thanks, Katie. By the way, very good panel, excellent topics. The first thing which I would like to mention is about valuing. I would be, of course, the first who would claim that nature would need to have intrinsic value. But unfortunately, as you know, we are living in market economies, and there are market incentives which are driving us, producers and consumers. And if something is not valued, it means it's not respected. And in the nature context, it means we are destroying it. So we have enough, by the way, of historic evidence that this is the case. So we need to have a shift in values, and biomass cannot be valued only when it's actually not valued when it stands in nature. And if we would properly value it, it would also not make sense, like you asked, to burn it. So there are many global biodiversity framework targets from CBD which are actually pointing in this direction. If we would have that, then what would be important is that we would need to have a solid matrix for them, which would include, CBD, UNEP, UNDP, World Bank, those institutions who would need to work around that to create a kind of minimum standards for natural capital accounting data. I have mentioned before that it would be essential also to integrate the materials, including biomass targets, into all these processes, including the CBD, including the climate and CBD, which are probably most important. And one important thing in this respect, since I'm an economist, is in particularly emerging from the Dasgupta review, one serious problem is that contemporary economics is simply treating us humans as external and superior to nature. And this is simply wrong. And if we will not change that, if the whole economic theory will actually lead us in that direction, then of course it's not a surprise that we have an economic system as we have it. Maybe just one comment, if you would allow me, on, because the minister spoke about the consequences in Germany, if I remember well, 2 years ago. It was the same in Slovenia this year. So it was a terrible summer. But there are two lessons which we learned. One lesson is, since we are calling ourselves on the sunny side of the Alps, there is no more sunny sides and safe places. So we are all in the same problem. And even if we have believed that some of these places are existing, they are not existing. And the second, even more important, is that cost cannot be avoided anymore. So we have seen unprecedented solidarity from everybody for those who were affected. But the real question behind that is why we are ready to show only ex post solidarity, but not to show solidarity ex ante. Also, when we talk about loss and damage, we basically talk about ex post solidarity. So we need to concentrate on that we would really focus on transforming economic systems, including the nature-based solutions, which are extremely important in that context.
Thank you, Franziska. I'd like to bring in you here because, of course, you also consult the German government. You're also working in a nexus of climate policies and, between the science and policymakers. When Janos was just mentioning we have to shift the values, Where are we on that journey? Where are we on that journey when it comes, of course, that the costs cannot be avoided? Do you think you have open ears on the other side from the policymakers for that argument, for that point?
Yeah, I think first we have to acknowledge that for hundreds of years, actually, our landscapes were managed in a way to fight floods. And that made a lot of sense because we have rivers all across Europe and flooding is a big problem. But now we have to move on and to prevent droughts. And we are not yet prepared, I would say. If you go to the local level, to the level of water management bodies on a regional and local scale, if you look at the legislation, it's all still very much focused on fighting water, on actually channeling water, but not on letting natural flows happen, and also not on keeping water back. Because what we also face is that in many regions we do not have a reduction of the total amount of precipitation, but the distribution is changing. We have more in winter and less in summer. So we need to keep back the winter precipitation. So I would say we are pretty at an early stage here. And also, for example, a wet peat soil automatically loses value at the moment. This is what many landowners and farmers say. I mean, they would be crazy to re-wet a land because they lose value at the moment. And also, for example, if you look at the Common Agricultural Policy, so in the last funding period, it was still encouraging drainage of peatlands, I would say. And paludiculture was not included at all. And then there was by a small group of people, a lot of effort actually to bring it in. And now in this funding period, it's included, but it's maybe kind of making a level, not yet a level playing field, I would say, because it's still a big risk actually to start paludiculture, and you can still carry on business as usual, and you receive all your subsidies. So, yeah, I would say there's a lot of things to be done still.
Yeah, okay, the to-do list is not... It's even getting longer, not shorter, I assume, and hear that. Thank you. Eliane, I'd like to come back to you because when it comes to cooperation, we also listened to both ministers now, the big role of cooperation and working together. So when it comes to agroforestry in combination with biodiversity and climate protection and linking circular economy, what we're also debating here, maybe you can share with us how does it work very well in your examples, and which examples can you share with us?
Okay, so one of the things that is really critical in terms of, examples where things are going really well is really when we're taking the local agricological conditions into account, the climatic conditions. So in many of the tropical places of the world, again, the precipitations are harder and more condensed. And so you're going to have longer periods of drought and then shorter periods of really hard rains. So the critical importance of the forest canopy in decreasing, the impact on the ground when there's heavy rains is really critical. And this is why, just having come from Nairobi on my way here, I mean, in northern Kenya, we had completely flooded regions. And so the critical importance is how are we looking at reforestation and agroforestry to help bring back soil health? Because when we know we're bringing back soil health, we're bringing back the sponge-like capacity of soils to be able to absorb a lot of water when there's heavy rains and to retain it when there's longer droughts to be able to feed moisture into the vegetation and the biomass present. So it's the criticality of really looking at what are healthy landscapes from below ground and above ground. And for us, it's really ensuring that we're looking at what are the right tree being planted at the right time for the right reasons, and focusing on tree growing and not tree planting. And also, the climatic conditions are changing. So what you planted somewhere 30 years ago may not be what is appropriate right now. So the work we're doing, for example, in dendrochronology, looking at tropical trees and tree rings, is really helping us understand how trees are reacting to the stress of climate change and helping us identify what is the sequencing we need to ensure really resilient landscapes.
What's the biggest obstacle on that journey? What would you say? Like, what is, or maybe where's the blind spot as well that we often overlook?
So the policy blind spot, it's do we have the enabling frameworks? And a lot of time we have contradictory policies that don't actually allow us to maximize the use of biomass. And so we really need a critical alignment of policies in the environment side and the agricultural side to really ensure that we're really maximizing what would be a circular economy that really harnesses cascading biomass use.
Thank you, thank you. Another question coming from the chat, and I do have you in my vision, so please send me some hand signs if you're still with us, of course, and if you have a question. When it comes to the building sector, Philip, and that's definitely your topic. So when we talk about the building sector to contribute to a more to circular use of biomass, and that's also a question. The building sector has already massive demand for wood in construction, so how do we secure that using even more wood here is not devastating forests around the world, and how do we overcome these barriers that we are focusing globally?
Yeah, I'm fully aware that the construction sector is mainly in the community of nature preservation and biomass protection. Really think about the construction guys as the last people they want to have around the table. There's a lot of distrust in this world, and I think there's obviously a lot of bad practices, extractive practices that justifies that. So we are at the beginning, unfortunately. I listened today, a couple of hours ago, to the food systems panel here in this room, and I felt that in other sectors, in other discussions, the discussions are much more evolved. The building economy is a latecomer to this, and I'm glad that in this COP, through the Forest Climate Leadership Partnership, I hope I said it right, there are signs and pledges that actually of governments, including Germany, to really sort of explore this avenue, explore this corridor to understand what are the climate effects and also the effects on positive effects on human health that can be harnessed if we actually replace some of the material demands with biomass. So we are working, for instance, with cities who are focusing, they got energy efficiency, they got the kind of operational carbon. Now to come with the question of embodied carbon and material efficiency is the sort of last thing they need on a pile of problems they have to deal with. But this is an important conversation to have, and it's really important to fold this into arguments, and particularly in the Global South, my experience is that climate mitigation through construction is not really on the agenda at all.
Why not?
Because because there's so many other things that are crowding the kind of problem space, and what is at the forefront of the agenda, justifiably, is poverty, job creation, dealing with social issues, maybe climate mitigation, but where materials come from, how do we bring them into the building cycle? How do we think about the landscapes outside of the city as basically the planetary boundaries we need to respect? Is Scope 3 emissions, it's not on the agenda. So what our argument is, our entry point is often to say that actually bio-based construction builds on indigenous practices, builds on traditions. It is labor intensive. It can actually redistribute value into the regions, create a more fair, equitable value chain in the building sector. And this is, I think, where we have a beginning of a conversation.
How far are we already in that conversation? Are we at the beginning, right at the beginning of that conversation? Or where would you see, of course, you as an architect, but also the building sector?
No, unfortunately, we are at the beginning of a conversation. There is this hen and egg problem that you brought in. Even in Europe, these paludiculture, insulation boards, the earth clay brick, all these kind of building products, they're niche products. And while we sort of on a dinner conversation, we love to have them, but do we really trust that they can be delivered at scale? No. So I think that this is where support also from the government should flow to build this kind of scalability of these. But it is really a question for also to demystify, to deal with the sort of negative connotations that bio-based materials have in Germany, in Europe, but also particularly in the Global South, where people say, we worked with, in Cape Town, people said, my parents lived in a township in a wooden shack. After the end of apartheid, they want to move in a concrete and brick house. So how do you start a conversation with that? It's a completely legitimate concern, and we in the Global North, provide maybe certain imagery that is defines or partly defines the aspirations of emerging middle classes and high income groups, and they go for concrete and steel and glass. we're having this conversation in Dubai, right? So, but even here in the green zone, I saw people developing building products in the United Arab Emirates based on palm waste and palm trunks. You know, this is stuff that gets put into landfills, creates methane. You know, this is. I mean, people lived here for centuries without air conditioning. So, it's all here. It's all in traditional building practices, which some of them I showed. It has to be place-based. It has to start with the materials that are where, and we have to make it palatable, interesting, aspirational to actually want to live in a house like that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Philip. Franziska, I mean, that's something for you now to tell us a little bit more about the products you know, that we can get from peatlands. That's also a question from the audience. What would be the next step to get products from peatlands on the market, and how to get farmers on board so they, of course, can live on it. Yeah, and of course that the building sector can also benefit for it, that it's attractive for the building sector market.
Yeah, somebody said already earlier, I think nature is our best technology. And if you look at these plants growing in peatlands, actually, I mean, they grow in water. Peatland is more than 95% water. So, and there's wind and everything going on. So they have very robust structures in their tissues. They have large air-filled cells. I mean, that rings a bell. Insulation is of course something with air filling, and then they have also protection from rotting, because they can grow in water basically for their lifetime. So all these properties in small circles among scientists they are known, but they are just being discovered in a broader audience at the moment. And it's very interesting. I mean, at the moment there are startups coming up actually trying to make a business case with it. But this will not, we need speed and scale, and to achieve this, I think really the governments come in. Also the drainage of peatlands, that was not managed by individual persons and landowners, but it was mainly governments doing it. There were big drainage commissions and everything. And I think now we need, in a way, similar commissions. As I said, I come from Indonesia, from the pavilion. They set up a peatland restoration agency, and they did it really very much government run, and they had clear targets from year one about areas to be revetted. And then, of course, the business comes in, as I said, so we have to bring it together. The sites, the farmers are open, in my opinion. There are many farmers actually worried about the climate and also open to, change the direction they do. Not all of them, but there are many more coming up, I think, in younger generations. And then they need the signal from the businesses that they are interested in it. And this needs to be scaled up on both sides now. I cannot predict that it will work out, but I'm pretty sure it's the only way forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Giacomo, of course, we've heard now the business perspective and the scientific perspective. Let's go back to the government perspective, right? Of course, when it comes to EU legislation, so where do you see the role of EU? And how could the European Union, of course, support all these to-dos that we've just listened to? Maybe use the microphone so everybody can hear you. Thank you.
This year we passed in the EU, the Parliament and the Council agreed on two important legislation. One is on LULUCF, the land use change and forestry sector, with the new target for 2030 I mentioned before. The other one is the Renewable Energy Directive, which includes also the biofuel biomass component. So, with regard to the impact of biomass on land use, the LULUCF regulation somehow gives a medium-term message to country, because the reporting of the country is done at the country level, to say, hey, look, at 2030 you have this target. So implicitly, be careful not to harvest too much, or not to use all the wood that you harvest for bioenergy. Otherwise, you will not reach your target. And this incentive somehow is there. It's implicit should be an incentive to a smart use of biomass. On the other side, the RED, the Renewable Energy Directive, that allows biomass to be considered renewable, so to have access to potential incentive by countries, and also the economic operator doesn't count the biomass, the CO2 from biomass, because it's already counted when trees harvested under LULUCF. So there is an implicit short-term incentive for the economic operator to use more biomass. So potentially there are these two conflicting messages that in my personal view has to be somehow managed at the level of the country. So the country, when they prepare, for example, the National Energy and Climate Plan, so somehow the plan how each country plan to achieve the climate target in the land use sector and in the energy sector, the country has to say, okay, I will plan to harvest this much and use this much wood for bioenergy that allow me to save other emission from fossil fuel. But you have to connect somehow the dots and to say, okay, if I plan to use this amount of wood for bioenergy, I calculate that this will have such impact on LULUCF. So knowing which is the target for LULUCF, the country has to design incentive for bioenergy which are not counterproductive, essentially, and help meeting the target, not to miss that.
Franziska, I'd like to come back to you. Is now everything on the shoulders of Germany or national states? Is that, also a difficult debate that we have to focus on more?
Yeah, I think what we really see, and Elaine mentioned it already as well, we have contradicting policies. And we have seen it with the Common Agricultural Policy. And now I think I'm also a bit afraid of, then we have LULUCF policies, we have other policies coming up. We had a nature restoration law discussion now as well, and this is all not really in line. So I would be very much in favor of having a bit still better EU coordination between legislation actually with respect to these targets. And then, of course, it's still a lot of things to be done at the country level, but we have also a lot of different countries in the European Union, and we cannot be sure that all the countries at the same speed and scale actually take it up. So I think here a very important role comes in actually for the European Union.
I have a look around. Do you have any questions? Give me a hand sign. I don't see any. So, Jan, you mentioned, of course, learning from each other, as a big part of cooperation. What would you say? What can the Global South learn from the Global North? But also, what can the Global North learn from the Global South when we talk about our topic of today?
So one area we didn't really touch on is one of the big issues we have today is the biggest place we're using biomass is fires. So we're losing 700,000 square kilometers of forest every year from forest fires. And we're only using 35,000 from land use change. So part of it is indigenous peoples had fire management wisdom that we can really bring to the table, because with climate change, this is an issue that we're seeing everywhere. Whether you're no matter what part of the world, we know that it affects you. Just in the closing remarks of the Minister of Environment of Canada, he mentioned the fires that had happened this summer there, and so the urgency of how we collaborate and share across science and traditional knowledge is a really critical element in terms of how we move forward. And then on the other side, particularly in the Global South, if we're going to have really strong, high-quality timber-based products, we need to build for the long term. So we need investments that really align with growing the industry in the long term. We need hope in terms of believing that that long-term investment will return. We need capacity building, because a lot of the wonderful constructions that my panelist was talking about are not necessarily in the Global South in terms of the modern construction. We need to go back in the past. And so we need to access the ancestral wisdom around cooling and heating and how traditional societies in the Global South were building with nature-based solutions. So we need to go back to that, but we need also to build capacity in terms of the technological knowledge we have in the Global North today. So I really see a beautiful exchange of North-South intelligence in this way.
Absolutely. János, coming back to you for our last question. Of course, when it's coming to the point of learning from each other, maybe you can answer that. What can we learn from other circular economy sectors? Where's the blind spot of our learning journey in that way, of bringing so many different perspectives on the table?
Yeah, well, we can learn a lot, of course. And I think the most important thing, if I put it a bit in a broader concept and also to some things which the colleagues mentioned, Franziska mentioned these contradictory frameworks. And I think this is pretty much the thing where we are losing a lot of the things. Our governance also in our governments, but even in European Commission, it's pretty much silo organized. So if I go very straight, if we would like to achieve net zero GHG emissions 2050, for whatever it will cost us a lot. So we need to collect the areas. We can't look to solutions only from the energy area, even if that is extremely important, to be honest. So I think it's extremely important, and this lack of systemic approach is something which is practically missing all across the board. And that's also the problem, that we don't transfer the circularity solutions properly from all the areas. And the second thing which I would like to comment, it's basically connected to the last thing which Elaine said about North and South. I think it's pretty critical. So our approach is basically very much focused on the supply side, on the cleaning the supply side. But frankly, if we clean up the steel industry as much as that important it is, but do not ask ourselves how much of that steel is actually used for cars which are 95% of their lifespan parked, or in houses where this steel could be replaced by something else. So we are simply missing the right questions. And if we will not look into the mirror and ask who is actually surpassing planetary boundaries and what should be done that this would not be anymore the case, then we will lose this global north, global south connection. And I think it is pretty much essential that we complement the supply side measures also with the demand side measures.
Thank you for that. Janusz Potocznik, Eliane Ubaljoro, Dr. Giacomo Grassi, Professor Philip Misselwitz, and Franziska Tanneberger. Thank you. This is your round of applause. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, your perspectives. I know 90 minutes, it's always too short in time. I know, but that's the big struggle of my work. Thank you so much. Yes, we need to talk more about value chains, of the to-do list, of legislations, of working together, bring different perspectives together, of course. Also, thinking about change and transformation, it's a big word. Thank you guys for watching, ladies and gentlemen, in our live stream. Thank you for sending your questions along, and thank you for attending. I know you have very busy calendars. We appreciate your time. We appreciate for making the time. You're always welcome here at the German Climate Pavilion. And tomorrow I see you for the morning coffee, right? Because we continue at 10 a.m. tomorrow, Dubai time. For you, ladies and gentlemen, maybe in Berlin, 7 a.m. That's not an excuse. Morning coffee. Then we talk about the strengthening of domestic financial resource mobilization in these times that we are living in the times of multiple crises. I'm looking forward to see you soon. Thank you so much for your attention. And as I said, have a beautiful evening. I see you soon. Thank you.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP28 in Dubai. Ambitious, just together.